So let's start. Welcome everybody to our OCarina webinar, this time in English. And the topic today is the application-centric deployment. But first of all, I want to give a short introduction what OCarina does, and I will try to keep it really short to have more time for the live demo. So my name is Jonas Trüstedt. I work at ATIX, and ATIX is a consulting company which tries to automate everything in your data center using open source software. So the main goal is to implement configuration management, lifecycle management, automatic deployment, setup of Kubernetes or other container platforms, as well as implementing certain applications like Apache Kafka, or to help to implement a DevOps mindset in your company. And one of our products is the OCarina. Why do we want to automate all the things? The main thing is we want to speed up all the deployments. We want to have an increased stability, to achieve reproducibility, to orchestrate services, and maybe also to enable self-service. So the thing is, we want to have a way where you, if you do the same thing twice or 100 times, you should get the same output every time. And this is also important if you want to redeploy something. You have the expectation that it works like the machines you deployed first. For this, we can help you with OCarina. OCarina is a lifecycle management tool, and ATIX offers a lot of services around it. So the main thing is that we develop the OCarina. So we have an engineering department which develops new plugins and also new features. The thing is, we want to have a vendor independent or operating system independent solution to manage all enterprise Linux distributions like Oracle Linux, SUSE Enterprise Linux, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, CentOS, Debian, Ubuntu, and probably the predecessor of CentOS 8. And for configuration management, we also do not focus on just one tool, but we try to maintain several tools. At the moment, we maintain the support for Puppet, SaltStack, and Ansible. And we have also several hypervisors you can attach to your OCarina to deploy new virtual machines like Proxmox, KVM, VMware, Ovid, and also several cloud providers like Microsoft Azure, Amazon Web Services, and the Google Cloud. And to have the best solution in your enterprise environment, we also support the OCarina. So if you have any problems, you can contact our support via ticket, and they try to help you as fast as they can. And if you want to set up a new OCarina, or you have questions how to implement an OCarina in your infrastructure, we have the consulting department where we can help you to find the best solution to implement the OCarina. And if you have several people in your company who want or should use the OCarina, we also offer a training. So there are regular training dates available on our website, as well as the possibility to have a specialized, customized training suited for your infrastructure and your colleagues. So what does the OCarina? The OCarina has several features, and these can be divided in 3 parts. So the deployment part, to create new servers or to install the operating system on new machines. The configuration, to set up the applications you want to use and to control the configuration like firewall users and all other configuration files, as well as the release and patch management. So you want to make sure that you have the control over the packages which are available for your servers and to have the possibility to stage them through different life cycles. So in this, effect is you can control the complete life cycle of a server, starting with a deployment. If you use virtual machines, you start with the creation of a new virtual machine, and this goes until you delete it. For the deployment, we offer different ways to deploy a new machine. And this also depends on your infrastructure, which way is best suited for you. So one thing is an image-based deployment, which means you have a template where you clone new virtual machines from, and then use scripts to configure them and to put in the right configuration you need at start. These configuration can be done via a script, via SSH or via Cloud Init. Then there's the possibility to create new machines and install the operating system with a network-based installation. This means that you may have a DHCP server, which gives the network configuration to the host and then forwards it to the right configuration or right setup file, depending on which operating you use. So like Kickstart, Autojust, or Preseed. And in case you don't have a DHCP server and use a static deployment, there's the possibility to use the boot disk-based deployment, which means you have a minimal ISO image, like 2 megabytes, which contains the network configuration for your newly created machines, and then it forwards you to the same Kickstart, Preseed, Autojust files at your OCarina to have a network-based installation. And since you can also provide certain parameters for your host, you have the possibility to have dynamic templates for Kickstart, Preseed, and Autojust files, which not only install the operating system, but also can already configure certain applications or configurations. And in case of deploying several bare metal machines, there's also a fourth way to install the operating system, which is the discovery-based deployment, which means you start your new bare metal machines with a generic discovery image, which then registers at the OCarina, and then you can decide which operating system and configuration you want to deploy on this machine. This is useful if you have your machines in your data center and you do not want to configure them before turning them on. Then we have the release management. This means for all these Linux distributions, the OCarina can be the mirror to provide all the packages and repositories your server needs. This means the OCarina synchronizes all the repositories and you can create something called content view. The content view is a collection of repositories with frozen patch levels. You can then forward to your hosts within certain life cycles and different versions. With this, you can make sure that every host has only those packages and versions available you want to make available for them. Additionally, you get the errata information, and in this case, we provide errata, security errata information for Ubuntu, Debian, and CentOS 7. For all the other Linux distributions, these come from the operating system maintainers like Oracle, SUSE, or Red Hat. And then if the server is set up and we have the control of all the configuration, we can, or the packages, we want to configure it. For configuration, there are also different possibilities, like during the host creation, you can use the templates, and you can configure them using host parameters. Then we can configure and attach the configuration management tools like Ansible, Puppet, and SaltStack. And with those, you can provide roles, classes, or states to your host. And you also can control the variables of these modules, roles, and states, so that you have the control of the configuration of your host. Additionally, you can configure OpenSCAP, which then sends OpenSCAP reports back to the OCarina, which is not a real configuration management, but a compliance tool. So this means you can put compliance policies into your OCarina and roll out those policies on your hosts and get the feedback if your host fulfills these compliance policies or if it is incompliant. And as the last step, you have the possibility to run jobs on your host, and those jobs can work with an SSH connection and can be scripts like a bash script, or can be Ansible playbooks as well. In summary, the OCarina has its core using different open source tools like Foreman, Catello, Ansible, SaltStack, and Puppet. What we do is our engineering and testing department takes those tools in stable versions, tests them, implements them in our current software. Maybe they fix some bugs, and those bug fixes are also given back to the open source community, as well as new plugins. Then we provide the errata information for CentOS 7, for Ubuntu and Debian, to have the information on security bug fixes for those enterprise, for those Linux distribution, which is important for an enterprise usage. Together with, for all these Linux distributions, we provide templates and the clients to register with the OCarina, so that we have a predefined set of templates to have the possibility to deploy these operating systems in a complete offline environment, with only the OCarina having access to the repositories you need for your hosts. Then we have the support, which helps you if you have any questions or encounter some bugs. And if you found a bug, you can give it to the support, and they will report it to the engineering department, and they will try to fix it as soon as possible. We can help you with consulting. We have many consultants with years of experience using Foreman, Catello, OCarina, and those configuration management tools. And this is why we can also give you a training with the general usage of OCarina and the fundamental knowledge you need to operate it in everyday use cases. And all these steps build the OCarina. And the OCarina is a tool to make your life maintaining or administering Linux hosts more easy. So now I want to jump right into the live demo and to explain you what we have with our new plugin, the application-centric deployment. In case of you need more information on Ocarino, please visit our websites with the documentation or the Ocarino website. And if you're interested in this or previous webinars, they are also available on our YouTube channel if you Google for Ocarino. So now let me just check if there are any questions in the chat before we switch to the live demo. So we have one question, if it is possible to manage Raspberry Pis as well. I think this depends on the operating system. And since the Raspberry Pis have an ARM architecture, as far as I know, we only provide those clients at the moment for Ubuntu. And I think those clients are also in a better state. So let me just switch the screen sharing. So here you can see our demo Ocarino, and it has several hosts running on it. And you see that we have all the different Linux distribution I told you, like CentOS, Oracle Linux, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, SUSE Enterprise Linux, Ubuntu, Debian, as well as Alma Linux. And as you can see, we also have some Windows machines, since we can also deploy Windows machines and configure them using the configuration management. However, the Windows machines are not included in the release and patch management. So the new thing we have in the Ocarino is called application-centric deployment. Application-centric deployment works with Ansible playbooks and is meant to deploy applications which consist of more than one host. And just to start with deploying a new application, because it will take some time to create new machines and to run the Ansible playbook, we will start to deploy a new Kubernetes cluster. So we will call it webinar Kubernetes. We have an application which is called Kubernetes, and we will add some hosts. Webinar Kubernetes, and we want to have a new Kubernetes master. This is not a best practice Kubernetes cluster because it, in this case, it only works with one master in the control plane. But in this case, we just want to show you that you can have a fully working Kubernetes cluster. And to deploy a new Kubernetes cluster in a very fast way. So in this case, let's take just 3 nodes, 1 master, 2 worker nodes. And so we defined a new application. And what we now can do is to run the deployment. And instead of having to deploy 3 different hosts and to configure them, and then to run an Ansible playbook to configure the Kubernetes cluster for every host, this is all done in one step. So this means if we now have a look at the report, which should be available now, we see that 3 new hosts are created. So we see the status of the host, and we see it's in build mode. So this means at the moment the operating system is gets installed. In this case, it's CentOS 7. We have the second one and the third one. And after the operating system is fully deployed on every host, it will start an Ansible playbook installing Kubernetes and connecting all these hosts. This will take a few minutes, so let me go through a different example, how to create a new application-centric deployment and what is needed for that. So for this, we start with a new playbook, and for this, I start with a playbook for an Elasticsearch cluster together with Kibana, which is used for centralized logging. And for this, there's also a playbook as a demo available, which we provide on GitHub. So with this, you can see how the playbook looks like and how it works. And if you have an Ocarino, you can directly start with the same playbook I use in this demo. So the Ansible playbook has to be available locally on the Ocarino. So in this case, I give the path for my playbook and the name of my playbook. And then I have to define what application I want to make available. So in this case, we name it Elasticsearch and Kibana. So then we select which playbook we want to use. And the next thing is that the Ocarino reads all the groups which are available in the Ansible playbook and gives me the different groups. So in this case, there are Elastic nodes and Kibana nodes. So we start with our Elasticsearch nodes. We want to deploy those on CentOS 7. And we want to connect them with the Ansible group Elasticsearch nodes. And we want to have at least one node for that. I don't have to give a minimum or maximum number. This is an optional thing. Then we have our Kibana nodes, which is usually only one node, I think. And then if you're familiar with Ocarino or Forming Catello, you can also add other parameters as well, like an host parameter. There is one called package upgrade, which upgrades all the packages during installation of the operating system, which on our demo servers is as default on false, because we want to have patches available to demonstrate how to patch my servers using Ocarino. So for those nodes, we want to have that these are fully upgraded when they come, when they are deployed. The next thing is maybe we want to change some of the Ansible variables. If we know the Ansible playbook, we might want to reconfigure something, like, for example, we need a different firewall port, or we want to change the heap size or whatever. Depending on the playbook, it reads all the Ansible variables, in this case for the Elasticsearch nodes, but we have them as well for the Kibana nodes. And here you can see where it tries to connect the Kibana to the Elasticsearch nodes. This means we don't have to connect it later because the Ansible playbook already takes care for that. And in case we have global Ansible variables, we have those as well. And we could add some more if we already know which Ansible variables we have, or we can edit them if we know that we want a new version of the elk stack. So now I have defined a new application, and now I could just start to deploy a new Elasticsearch cluster by defining a new instance. So in this case, we take an webinar Elastic instance. We take the Elasticsearch and Kibana. And in this case, we start with webinar Elastic 1. And in this case, we want to have the Elastic cluster to have 3 nodes for high availability. And we also want to have 1 Kibana node. So like that. And now I also have the possibility to override those parameters I set before in my application definition, if I want to change it for a certain instance or just for 1 node. The same is for all the Ansible variables. If I do not want to change them for all my application instances, for example, if I do not have just a single Kubernetes or Elasticsearch cluster, but multiple. And then I can just override this for every node itself. And now we have this new instance. If we now look at the host list, we see that there is no Elastic host so far. On the other side, we see that here are our webinar Kubernetes hosts, and they are still during the installation of the operating system. Now let's deploy our Elasticsearch cluster. And what we will see is that those new hosts will start to appear in our host list. So now we have the first Elastic node. And in a few seconds, we have also the remaining 3 nodes. So now we have all the 3 Elastic nodes, only the Kibana node is missing. And there is also our Kibana node. What the OCarina does in the background is that it uses my host group, which has predefined values for those deployments. So this means it automatically sets the domain, the subnet, and also my hypervisor to deploy those machines. So this means we need a standardized way on how to deploy our new machines. And then the CentOS 7 operating system is installed together with an SSH key to run Ansible afterwards. And now let me check the that is of our Kubernetes cluster. It's still in build mode. And it looks the same for the Elasticsearch cluster. Oh, so not here, we want to see the report. But those also need some time. And we can have a look at so what we already see is that our host is registered at the OCarina because it says there are security errata installable. This means it's already connected to the repositories we make available to the OCarina, but the host is not fully patched. So the host is currently patching all the packages. Then it only has to set up the SSH keys, and then the installation is finished. So let me just check if there are any questions in the meantime, because I think it will need some more minutes. At the moment, there are no questions. So if you have any questions, please write them in the chat. And if you want to use your own Ansible playbooks, the only thing you need is that the Ansible playbook has those group variables available for those groups you want to have in your application definition. And then you can have several instances. So in this case, we also have just an installed Kubernetes cluster available. So this is already deployed. And we can also have a look at the configuration jobs. So we see was also a failed run. And in case of your installation has some errors running the playbook, or if you have changes in your playbook and you do not want to redeploy your complete instance, but only to rerun your playbook, this is also possible by using the run playbook or the run playbook and customize first. With a customize first option, you have the possibility to increase the verbose level, which may help you with debugging. So here you can set the verbose to with the different debug levels, or just to provide different tags. And if you want to, if you run this playbook, we can just retrigger it for this cluster. You get the output like you used from Ansible as well. So you have all the output available in your GUI. So you do not need to run any SSH connection manually using the terminal if you do not want to. And we just could follow this, or we could just have a look if our webinar hosts still not. Oh, so the first one is now ready and installed, but it says reboot required. So probably it's currently in the reboot of the at the end of the installation. And let me see if this is also the case for the last one. Yes. So if we now have a look at our webinar Kubernetes cluster, we see that these hosts are now deployed and they are powered on. And if we now look for the configuration jobs, we see that the Ansible playbook has not run so far. This is because it has a short delay to for the hosts to make it possible that the hosts can reboot. And let me check if it starts. So we can just have a look at all the jobs where we can have a look at the rerun of my other Kubernetes job. And so there is our Ansible playbook for the already pre-installed Kubernetes cluster, but it's still running. And we see that it's currently has finished the tasks to deploy the master, and now it starts to deploy the worker nodes. And as you can see, we have not the best playbook for our Kubernetes cluster at the moment, because it has some tasks which can fail and where the errors are ignored. And so this is an expected failure. And now this playbook has finished, and we see overall we have no failed states. And what we have is also the URL where we can access the Kubernetes dashboard, and where we can see that all these workers are connected. However, there are no other deployments so far. So I want just to make sure that this works as well with our webinar cluster. I will not wait until the Elasticsearch and Kibana playbook is finished, because it will take some more time. So let me see. It's still not started. So are there any questions regarding the application-centric deployment, or any feedback? Is this something you think is what can be useful? Because we had several customers who said, yeah, it's cool that we can automate the deployment of our hosts and configure them via Ansible, but we do not have just only single hosts, but we need to configure them as a cluster solution also for like databases, like a Galera cluster. And if there is the possibility to have a multi-host deployment, which can also run a multi-host Ansible playbook. And this is why we came up with this application-centric deployment, which is now at the first version. So if you have any ideas on features or improvements after you used it or you tried it, please tell us so we can improve it further. At the moment, it's the first working version, so there is still some other tweaks we want to add there, and these will be included in the next OCarina upgrades. So let me check again if okay, it's still not running. So let me check for questions. There's still no questions so far. So a second demo playbook we also provide on our GitHub is the deployment of Prometheus and Grafana, which is mainly used for monitoring in the container world, but it's not fixed only on containers, but you can use it to monitor and to have the alerting on certain metrics of all your hosts as well. And those playbooks are meant to have a starting point on how to use the application-centric deployment. And on the other side, you might you could have already some Ansible playbooks you usually use. We do not have a fully Kubernetes playbook, which is in the status of making it public for a best practice Kubernetes cluster. However, we are still working on it. So this will come in future. So it seems that the deployment is a bit slow today because the last time I tested it, it only took like 10 minutes. So the other thing is, if you have these instances, you can also choose that you have instances you do not need anymore. And in this case, you can delete it. And let me just delete this Prometheus Grafana setup. And if I want to delete this instance, I will be asked if I also want to delete the virtual machines which are part of this instance. And if I also select those, not only the instance disappears from my application instance list, but also the virtual machines in the background are completely deleted. So also for this, I can manage my application as an application, even if it's consisting of more than one host. So let me check again for all the hosts. So I could just try to start the playbook manually. It should start automatically. If I start it automatically, manually, and it starts the automatic playbook at the same time, it will run into an error, but I do not want to wait anymore. So let's try this. So what it now does, it runs the same playbook as for the previously shown demo cluster. It will have some more changes on the host because the other one was already configured. But I want to show you that in the end, we get a Kubernetes where we can access the dashboard as well. So this Kubernetes cluster is still working with Docker as a runtime environment below Kubernetes, which is also not best practice anymore. But usually you use cryo or containerd. And when we will make a playbook to deploy a new Kubernetes cluster with application-centric deployment, if we make this playbook available, it will also be a playbook which uses 3 master servers in the control plane to have the high availability, because the single master instance is just good for demo use cases because you need less machines where you have to wait for the deployment. On the other side, since you can now deploy them with only 1 click, so you only have to add 2 more hosts to your application instance, there is no need on the reduction of these master servers, and then you could have a playbook which deploys a cluster. You could also use as a good starting point for a production Kubernetes cluster. And the other application-centric deployment playbook will also not use a Docker below it, because Kubernetes drops the support for the Docker shim. Let me check how far the Elasticsearch cluster is. Maybe it is faster than our Kubernetes cluster. So the Elasticsearch nodes are also deployed, as well as the Kibana node. Let me check if the playbook is started. No. Then we switch back to the Kubernetes cluster. In this case, our configuration job is now still running, and it's also shown here even if we started it manually. And at the moment, it also shows the name of the OCarina itself at this position, because the Ansible playbook is running on this OCarina. And if you use like other OCarina proxies for other subnets, then also the responsible proxy is shown here at the moment. This will or might change in future. So how far is our playbook? It has done all the prerequisites to deploy Kubernetes. So it installed Docker and all the other required packages. It started the Docker service, the configured and started the firewall D service, and also the kubelet service. The kubelet is the node agent which connects all these Kubernetes nodes. And then it also configured the network ports and firewall D we will need to have available for Kubernetes to work. And now it starts the master, where it pulls all the images which need to start or which are needed to run a Kubernetes cluster. And based on those images, now it starts to run the containers for the control plane, like the API server, the controller, the scheduler. And after the control plane is established, then the worker nodes are added. And in the end, the Kubernetes dashboard is started or deployed. Let me open a new tab, then we might see the same for the Elasticsearch. So here we see that the playbook for the Elasticsearch, which started automatically in this case. So it was a bit faster than the Kubernetes one. And here we see that it also starts with some checks, in this case, that it runs on CentOS 7 because this demo playbook was developed on CentOS 7 and is not tested on other distributions. So this playbook checks that you do not use any other distro, because otherwise it would fail. Then it also configures the firewall ports for the Elasticsearch cluster, as well as for the Kibana cluster. So in the end, we will have a Kibana GUI available, where also my Elasticsearch cluster is already connected. The only thing we will miss there is hosts who send their logs to our Elasticsearch. So there are all the installation steps. Let me have a look at the Kubernetes cluster. So there the master is deployed and the dashboard is currently deploying. So now the worker nodes are getting connected to the Kubernetes cluster. This uses kubeadm and the background. And for this, you need to have a token to join the correct control plane. So, and now it collects all the information for the Kubernetes dashboard. And in the end, we get the URL on how to access this dashboard. This was also not deployed using an ingress or something like that, and it uses self-signed certificates. So you can see that this is not a best practice deployment. And the next thing is you could just skip the authorization. But if we now have a look at our hosts or the nodes connected in this Kubernetes cluster, we can see that we have those 3 nodes we deployed at the starting of the live demo. And we see that those are connected to each other since just a few minutes. And so we have a Kubernetes cluster, a basic one and not a production ready one, but this shows you that the application-centric deployment deploys an application consisting of different hosts or different host groups and connects them together to have a fully working application in the end. Let me see if this is also the case for my Elasticsearch. The Elasticsearch cluster should be running now, and now only the Kibana is installed. So we can wait for those 3 to 5 minutes. Then I show you that also the Kibana GUI is available for these hosts as well. And in case of you have very specific questions like how to use this feature or the possibilities of this feature in your environment, you can contact us and we could have a talk on how you could use application-centric deployment. And if you need help developing these playbooks, we have several specialists with many experience in writing Ansible roles and Ansible playbooks. And together with the knowledge of OCarina, we can also transform existing Ansible playbooks and roles to an Ansible playbook you can use with application-centric deployment in case there are changes needed. So we finished the Kubernetes cluster. So now this has finished, and if we now try to connect to our webinar Kubernetes, it's not HTTPS. Okay, it's with HTTP without certificate, but we can see that it loads Elastic. And now we see that we have our hosts, and somewhere I can also see the where do I see the index patterns? No. This is also, so as you can see, I'm not very familiar with using Kibana, or at least not this version. Somewhere we should see also that the Elasticsearch nodes are already connected. So if we want to use it, we can start to write our log files to the Elasticsearch node and or to the Elastic cluster, and then we can visualize it using the Kibana nodes. Okay, so at this point, I want to finish this webinar. As far as I can see, there were no further questions anymore. So I hope you liked the new feature of the application-centric deployment. And if you already use OCarina, please try it and give us feedback if you like it or how to improve it or what other features you might want to see in future. So then thank you for your participation and have a nice day. Until the next webinar, which will take place in like 4 weeks. So thank you and goodbye.